blackboard what the round looks like. Okay? What do we do with this now? Well, now you have to know how to if you had to write a case, how would you do it? So we're gonna refresh on this and then get into how to write an aff case, an affirmative, okay? So what happens, and this is audience participation. So what happens in the 1AC? Someone tell me what happens in this very first speech. What does the first affirmative, the very first speech that's said, what do they do? They read the plan. So they read that whole case. You all have the evidence packet in front of you. So it's the one that Jake and I cut and Yaya just made copies of. If you look at that and you look at the very front page, it says 1AC, right? Very first page. It says 1AC. We made this super easy, okay? So what do you have to read from that? Well, you need to read the page that says inherency and has a plan on it, okay? So that page you have to read as the affirmative, okay? Then if you turn the page, it'll say solvency. Everybody, if you are the 1AC, you have to read this page, okay? The next page you have to read is observation 2, solvency, okay? And after you read that, this is where you get to have fun and you and your partner can make some decisions. There are 3 advantages. In no world can you read all 3 of them because you don't have the time. So what you get to do is we made this where you get to choose what advantage do you want to read. Okay? So we'll give you your partners in a little bit during the work period at the end of today, and you will get to decide with your partner which advantages you like. Or if by round when you're affirmative, if you want to try out the different advantages. Okay? So you would choose no more than 2. Probably only 1, depending on how well you read English verbally speaking. Okay? So that is the case. That is what you read as the affirmative. So you read the first 2 pages and then one of the advantages. Make sense? Okay? So tell me, what does the one in C do? Who knows what happens in this speech?
First negative speech have to correspond with first affirmative speech.
Yes.
Very good.
So they talk about the stuff that the affirmative read. What's the other thing they do? They do one other thing. Do you remember?
Explain off case.
They explain the off case. Yes. So if you skip down a whole bunch of pages to where it says negative, way down there, or in there, it'll say negative index or some content. Yeah, there we go.
So, you see here that you have 4 disadvantages. Okay? You have that Prime Minister Abe politics disadvantage that we've been talking about. We have an example of a wheat disadvantage that you can read. We have a disadvantage that is very standard and just says that GMOs are good. If the plan happens, then nobody will produce GMOs anymore, and we need GMOs in the world. Okay? We also have something at the very top called a Japan nationalism disadvantage. Okay. So you have a choice of 4 different disadvantages. I would suggest that you only read one. Okay? Maybe two. But I think that when you're first practicing, maybe your first round, you read just one of these positions. Because as we've talked about, you can choose to just prove that the affirmative plan causes something bad to happen with disadvantages. Or you can choose to prove that the affirmative team isn't good enough, their plan, their case isn't good enough, by directly answering theirs. But the best negative teams do both. So, read one of these positions, and then you have time still to read answers specifically to the affirmative case. So what we've done here is, in that affirmative index, you had where the advantages were on the very first page of the evidence packet. Yes. On the very first page of the evidence packet, where there is affirmative things. Yep, the affirmative index.
The affirmative. When we were talking about the 3 different advantages that you could do.
Right. So, as you recall, like Shanna said, you have 3 different advantages that you can choose from when you're affirmative, right? Well, say that you're negative, and you are debating somebody else, and they read the marine ecosystems advantage while you're negative. Well, if you look here, we already have answers set out for you for when you are negative that you can read to the marine ecosystems advantage, okay? So this index in this evidence packet is your best friend. Get to know that index, and that will keep you organized as you are preparing for these speeches, okay?
And so these would be the on-case arguments. So, Koki, is that right? Got 2 names. Okay, so as Koki said, you would read and answer the case. Those are these defense arguments. And then, Nordine? Hold on.
Yo.
Yo?
Real.
Yo.
Ro. Thousand things. Okay. You would read the off-case arguments, which are one of the disadvantages. Okay? Does this make sense? At least a little bit. Again, it will make more sense when we do the round. Yes?
So in first negative speech, we have to speak about
So say they ran the small farms advantage, okay? So they say that banning GMOs is good for small farmers, okay? You would go, I've got evidence for that, and you would turn to page 20 in the negative part, okay? And you could read those arguments, and that's your on-case arguments that you need.
after responding to affirmative speech and first negative speech, she can choose
One.
one.
Yep, just one of what's listed under offense. Yep.
So you should just start off your very first debate round, or when you're practicing, start out with just one off-case position, okay? Maybe you'll feel more comfortable as you go through and for your second negative round and you have time remaining in that speech. If you feel comfortable, then try and maybe read a second one. But at the beginning, just stick with one. Even in my last debate rounds ever, I really enjoyed just reading one off-case position, because that's so much more time that you have for the rest of your speech to really make your opponent's case look bad. Okay, it's important to have an off-case position, but any time that you save is time that you can make the case look terrible.
Now here's a question. When you're answering the case, can you only read evidence, so what Jake and I have put in there, or can you make your own arguments that are what is known as common sense that you could just explain through claims and warrants? Can you use those? You do not have to only make the arguments that Jake and I made, that we wrote. So if you're sitting there and they say something, Japan is your country. You live here, right? You know more about it than Jake or I ever will. Okay? So if you know something and you can make that argument, you don't always have to read evidence. You can make an argument off the top of your head as long as you explain it. So for those of you that have done parliamentary debate or have seen Parley, you can make those arguments. Okay? Yes?
But there is a possibility, like, what is your source, or
Yes. Yeah, you do run into that problem of how do you know that's true. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't make them. Because if you can give a lot of warrants and reasons, you don't always have to have, like, do I need to provide a piece of evidence to tell you the sky is blue? Or do you know the sky is blue? You know the sky's blue, right? I don't need to go read an article to you, right? So that's those kind of arguments that we're talking about. Those just, maybe it's a money thing. Well, how are we paying for it? Or how will we afford, if we can't import the food, and we can't grow it here, how do we afford it? If it's not a GMO product, we have to buy an organic something. You can make those arguments, and you don't have to read evidence for it all the time.
Yeah. So, Shanna and I wanted to provide you with, the evidence so that you don't have to worry about constructing your own basic arguments from scratch. But when it comes to those off the top of your head, sharp arguments, those common sense arguments, or sometimes we'll also call them analytical arguments, you are more than welcome to, and not more than welcome, you should make those arguments yourself. Don't feel locked into just reading evidence in your speech. And in fact, I would suggest to you that the only speech where someone is just reading evidence should be this one. Since it's the first speech in the round and you don't know quite yet what your opponents are going to say, this speech is completely pre-written, like Shannon showed you. You have the inherency page and the solvency page and those advantages. But after that, you should make those analytical arguments, because those are the arguments that show the judge that you're really thinking about what's happening here. Those are the comments and arguments that make your judge think critically about the evidence that they're hearing.
Also, you never know, that one argument you make off the top of your head that you just think of in your speech could be the argument that wins you the round. Because maybe you have some really great argument and the affirmative can't answer it. And they're just like, I don't know. Then you as the negative get to go, I don't know is not an answer, so you wouldn't want to vote for the affirmative. You would want to vote for the negative because they can't provide you all the information you need as the judge. Make sense?